So, hello everybody, welcome again. We're going to hop into our champagne lecture. So, Beth, why do you love champagne so much?
There are so many reasons, but I think that the main things that jump out to me, of course, are the taste. I love that champagne can pair with almost any food, but also is wonderful on its own. But I also think that something I really enjoy learning about is, and this is a surprising answer to those who know a lot about wine, is actually the terroir of champagne. I really enjoy learning about the different sub-regions and how that affects the flavor. And this is interesting because champagne has, at least for the last couple hundred years, been a blend from across the regions. Has been a lot of what's been imported into the United States, and what comes to mind, a lot of the big houses. I could throw out some names. Sure. But, you know, there's the famous yellow label, but there's a lot of others. There's Téranger, Boulanger, Paul Roger, Louis Roeder, Cristal. These are big house brands, but we get really excited about people who grow and their own grapes, make their own wine, which is actually very similar to Burgundian style and the way they do it in many other wine regions. What do you love about champagne, Steven?
Well, I love the location, history, terroir, the various grapes that are grown there, types of styles, and just really the marketing of champagne too. Really kind of gets me going. And then just delicious bubbles. You know, it adds a little something special, that tirage process that we're going to talk about.
I think we also like the engineering of it. We're going to talk about that. There's a lot of engineering that goes into making champagne. I think that speaks to us as scientists and engineers.
So we're going to quickly fly in on our virtual plane. We're going to the Champagne region, which is in the northern part of Europe. And we're going to blitz through these pretty quickly. This is just a crash course, not on the plane.
You fly into Paris. Mm-hmm. Champagne is going to be about an hour to northeast.
Yep. And we can take a train from the airport straight to Reims.
A high-speed train.
High-speed train. So it takes about 45 minutes, I think.
It's pretty good.
So it's pretty good. And then you can get off the train, and within steps, you could be at a wine bar drinking champagne. So we are there.
The wine that we're drinking tonight is coming from one of the specific subregions. So there's a couple of major subregions in Champagne. We have Vallée de la Marne, Montagne de Reims, Côte de Saison, Côte de Blanc, and what some people call Côte de Bar, other people just refer to it as the Aube. And Côte de Blanc is one of my particular favorites. That's where this wine comes from, and that's where we spent a lot of time on our trip.
Yes. And each one of the regions has slightly different terroir. They also focus on different grapes there. Within these regions, we do have some specific Grand Cru sites, which are designated as having typicity. It can fetch a higher value because better quality grapes are grown here and produced. This is a little zoomed in version of the Côte de Blanc because that's where we're going to be focusing on this evening. One of the way of thinking about it is really the Cremant, Avis, Auger, and Les Riceys Auger.
Very nicely done, Steve.
Thank you. I've been trying. When we were over there, somebody kind of summarized it as saying Les Riceys Auger is the springtime of Champagne. Auger, it has the summer vibes. Avis is your fall and autumnal feel, and then your Cremant has the winter. And when we talk about it in that way, it sounds pretty metaphorical, and it kind of is. A lot of what we're going to be tasting is really, it struggles when you have the thoughts in your mind, being able to communicate it clearly and effectively to other people. And that's kind of the fun part about drinking high-quality champagne, is that you sometimes get a feeling that you can't quite explain.
It can conjure memories of certain times in your life, of certain particular events or meals. It can be very powerful where you're trying to find that right descriptor of how it makes you feel.
And so as we head into the Côte de Blanc, we are going to pass first through the Cremant region. And we have a little bit of a video of when we get into
the Moncuit. So this is where the wine we're drinking tonight comes from, the Pierre Moncuit. These are some vines that Stephen got some footage of while we were there. It's a beautiful little village. All of these are quite small and very close together. This is not like looking at states on the East Coast. We are talking Alexandria and Arlington, maybe closer. But beautiful, beautiful.
So that's our first pretty picture.
Yeah.
We're going to kind of go through the history real quick because it's great to have a little bit of context. When we're drinking wine from a region, the soil has been, has had grapevines growing there for a very long time in a lot of these European regions. And we're going all the way back to 50 BC when the Romans designated this as a wine growing region and started planting vines, growing grapes. Romans were pretty smart about that. They would plant vines along the way and create the foundation for wine production. So that way, if they had to fall back from the front lines, they had wine ready to go to help their wounds and settle their sorrows if they needed to, or celebrate. Either way, no.
All great wine stories start with the Romans.
It's very true. Very true. In the Middle Ages, we have we have the monks that are in there. They're improving the fields. They're improving the wine quality, and really.
Some of you may have heard of one in particular.
Oh, Dom Perignon.
Dom Perignon.
It's very true. One of the factoids that I find most interesting about this era of time is that the monks at this point, they start excavating out the limestone or the chalk. I'm sorry, the chalk from this region, and that's what actually creates the Champagne caves that are used today. The infrastructure of those caves are vital to the success of the Champagne region because it provides the correct amount of temperature and humidity for the aging process that happens while they're in that second fermentation.
The other interesting thing about this era that I think people aren't as aware of is a lot of people were spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to make the wine not sparkling.
That's right. Yeah, the Champagne was not the forefront leader in making sparkling wine at this era.
Sort of really wanted the opposite. They wanted to be like Burgundy, and were finding it more challenging.
And the reason for that is because during this era, it's a lot colder than it is today. And so what happens, and we don't have the technology that we have today. So what ends up happening is that they bottle. They harvest, and there's a lot of, a fair amount of sugar development in the grapes. But before they can get them fully fermented, they have to bottle. And what happens is that they've reached so far into winter that fermentation is stopped because it's too cold. So then they put it into bottles, and then once springtime comes around and it starts heating back up, there's still yeast that's in the bottles, and they start gobbling up the active sugars and have ancestral method, which is where you just you have active yeast eating sugars in the bottle, and then you have sparkling wine. But at this era, we don't have strong glassware. That doesn't come until the 17th century, where George Ravenscroft from Britain develops a lead-based, a glass that comprises lead in it, which is really strong.
Yeah, what's really interesting about the history of Champagne, as we mentioned, they were trying to make it not sparkling. Well, it turned out, and this is to the chagrin, I think, of the French, the British were actually the ones to figure out how to stop the cellar accidents due to explosions, and that was a technological advance. So the technological advance of being able to make stronger glass allowed the industry to move forward. Previously, they were really struggling with, they would lose huge numbers of bottles of champagne because one would go off and the others would go off because the bottles weren't stable.
And really, it is a catastrophic type of event. We still see that today, actually, that catastrophic explosion when we look at canned wine. So canned wine has a very similar effect where when we're shipping these high acid wines inside of our cans, if one can explodes and then that wine gets on the outside of another can, it can start to degrade the outside of that, and then it causes a catastrophic explosion effect. So that way your whole shipping container is lost.
So technology is an important part of the wine industry, and the being able to make the stronger glass, and they were also motivated to do this because the British actually very much like champagne, and they still do today. They are one of the biggest buyers, huge fans. Sir Winston Churchill has some very famous quotes about champagne. We don't fight for France, we fight for champagne, or something like this. So they've been a big part of the history as well.
And speaking of the French, and the people who really champion this to be a thing, to be important. Why we're drinking it today, you had to have your original consumers, and in the 17th and 18th century we have the royalty that start drinking champagne. And when royalty starts drinking it, well, then everybody wants to start drinking it.
So they've always been going after the coolest, fanciest people out there. But it also happens to be a fact that the cathedral in Reims is where French royalty, the French king would be crowned. And so that it was an easy transition to say, well, you should drink our wine.
Well, we want to get to the more fun stuff. There are tons of books. So here's one. It is Wine and War. So we're not going to talk about the world wars that happened.
Except to say that it left a serious mark in the region, and for those of you who are more familiar with history, it's an important time period. But yeah, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna
The one interesting thing I think that is about that I do like to talk about with the Second World War was really like all of the men got taken to the armies, and so we really start to see women taking the reins at the vineyards, and it's really one of the first wine regions that empowered women to take over and was accepting of that because they had to.
Yeah, Champagne has a long history of women taking charge of the business. We have Veuve Clicquot. There's also a really good book about the history of that, and Madame Boulanger, to name a few.
In these events, we like to just say when they received their appellation AOC designation. So that was 1936. It has to be one of the
first. Yeah. It has to be. I don't know where it ranks, but that's a long time ago.
And being one of the first has allowed them to really kind of take the reins of showing what an AOC can do. They have various leadership, if you will, to make sure that there is quality product coming out of these regions, and really making sure that every decision that's made to evolve the AOC is made with this marketing and business perspective, as well as what's good for the consumer and for the growers. And so it's really interesting to have somebody that is kind of, in a way, leading the charge in what they can do for a region. And then the last one, where we are today, a lot of the conversations are about climate change and sustainability. We also, I think, have a very interesting talking point that we'll get into in a fair bit about grower champagne. The ability, by having these technological advancements, means that growers can get onto the market, onto the international stage, get their products spread across the world, and take a bite of the apple, if you will.
All right.
right.
So that was a little overview of the history. Now let's get into the grapes. So I used to have them all memorized, but I can't quite remember some of the more oddballs in there. But there are 3 major grapes you need to know for this region. And then there are a few more that you will see every now and then. Don't worry about them too much at the moment. Pinot Noir is the first one we have here. Pinot, as Stephen mentioned earlier, this is going to grow better in certain regions in Champagne as opposed to others. So you're going to see a lot of Pinot Noir in the Vallée de la Marne and some in Côte de Saison and Montagne de Reims.
Yep.
We all know and love Pinot Noir. It expresses in Champagne more as a cool climate grape. We were just in Napa, and there is a California Pinot. This is not your California Pinot.
And also,
leaner, sharper.
Also, it's important to talk about, as we put up, the second red grape, Pinot Meunier. So I think we can talk about both of these at the same time.
Yes.
When we have a Champagne, there are rosés, there are those red pigments, but they aren't as deep in color as when you buy a Pinot Noir or if you were to find a Pinot Meunier. And that's because the berries, like the pulp on the inside, is clear. And so you only get the color if it stays in skin contact. And so we have the situation where we can press the juices and not have them come into contact with the skin, and that allows for
yes, you can drink a golden champagne that is Pinot Noir. It does not have to have the rosé coloring.
Of course.
That's right. Yes. Pinot Meunier is one of our favorites. It grows well in the Vallée de la Marne, especially, which is a little more clay based. We think that this grape, there's a conspiracy theory behind this grape. It has been remarked upon by many houses as being lesser than its fellow grapes, Pinot Noir, and we're about to mention Chardonnay. We think this was an attempt to keep costs low, because if you look at many very delicious, big house champagnes. They have a fairly large portion of Pinot Meunier in there, and well, you don't want to go talking it up, and then they have to pay more for those grapes. But now it's becoming quite trendy to have 100% Pinot Meunier champagnes, which we very much like. They can be fleshier, bigger, more robust, really, really delightful, fun, expressive wines.
And as we start to talk about like the idea of conspiracy theories, even if you do look at Pinot Meunier, the literature and the current narratives, well, it's on the market, right? The cat's out of the bag. People are making 100% Pinot Meunier. Tastes delicious. It's great. But yet somebody's still out there saying, well, yeah, but Pinot Meunier just doesn't age as well as Pinot Noir. Why? Why is that a narrative? Where does that come from? I think it ages just as beautifully.
We've had some great aged Meuniers, yeah.
But so when you hear the narratives that exist, sometimes there might be nefarious reasons for lowering costs, maybe.
2 other fun facts about Pinot Meunier. It is a mutation of Pinot Noir, and it actually means miller's Pinot because it can develop this downy, white, almost flour-like deposits on the bottom of the leaves. They called it miller's Pinot. And the last of the 3 major grapes you know from Champagne, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and Chardonnay. Chardonnay grows in basically every wine region in the world, but it grows really, really well in Champagne. Tonight we were drinking something that is 100% Chardonnay, so this is the grape that we're really focused on. Chardonnay finds its home in the Côte de Blanc. This is Chardonnay territory. There are chalky limestone soils here that have deposits from when this part of France used to be underwater, and it expresses just beautifully. You get racy, lean, mineral-driven Chardonnays. When they're aged, they can create really, really lovely effects as well. So this is it. This is also an aged champagne, so we're drinking grapes from the 2017 vintage, and it is now 2023. So
I heard you say limestone.
Limestone.
And so I thought I'd throw up our terroir. I seem to have arranged the slides a little bit out of order, but that's all right. We're talking about terroir.
Yeah.
So our 2 big ones here, limestone and chalk.
So the under the top layer of soil in this part in the Côte de Blanc, you'll actually find the ground is like chalky white. So if you're wearing like black boots, you'll get this chalky white bit on there. And
this below the topsoil goes all the way back to the Jurassic era. So there was a shallow water that existed there, and we just have the concentration of skeletons and seashells, and that's
so you can see a marine deposit here in the photo. Yeah,
and that allows for a right amount of porosity for water retention, as well as, when we talk about limestone, one of the interesting factoids that I just stumbled across was that it has such a unique water property where when it's cold, it absorbs water and holds it, and then when it's hot, it allows water to drain through. And so this means that when you have the winter, in the wintertime, when you want to reset your water tables, limestone helps you out in that capacity. But then in the wintertime, or in the summertime, when we want to have our grapes drinking the water's available for them. But then there's also good drainage, so our roots aren't just sitting in water, and they're struggling a little bit trying to go deeper. Also, that organic materials that exists in the soil is going to come into our grapes and really increase that minerality feel and the robustness of the wine. Mm-hmm. Let's see. All right, so now the champagne method, we're going to do it a little bit differently. All that happens really is that there's let's talk about it. So what's the first step in order to make champagne in Champagne?
before just so that the pun is available to everyone, method champenoise, champagne method, is what's used to describe the secondary fermentation in bottle to create sparkling wine. So there's lots of different kinds of sparkling wine in the world, but this is a particular style, and you will see it called the champagne method. So,
exactly.
Okay, so now our explanation of the champagne method.
So the first part of it is that you have to first obtain unobtainable land. So we were able to meet the next heir
of Lancelot Pienne, and this is in Côte de Blanc as well.
Okay. The next step is that you have to pay for and acquire top of the line machinery. And
so these are tanks where they're able to keep the grapes temperature controlled.
And notice just how many small different grapes there are. This is because the trend really is getting to single parcel and being able to identify what you have in tank and not just throwing everything that you have in one giant tank and hoping for the best. We're really starting to see this emergence of
site-specific fermentation, barreling, everything. A lot of producers are keeping it separate for a lot longer than.
And it's starting to showcase what it means to have terroir. All right, the next thing about champagne in the champagne method is that you have to make a great base wine. And I think this is one of the talking points that's most important about champagne. If you don't have a good base wine, you're not going to have a good champagne at the end. And that goes for all sparkling wine. And when we see the cost of champagne compared to another bottle at a grocery store right next to it, we have to realize that it was first made into wine and then it was made sparkling. It's not all happening at the same time.
This video is from one of Champagne's most famous, like, rock star of Champagne. The gentleman there is Anselm Solos, and we had the pleasure to go to a tasting of his base wines when we were in France, and it was in French, so I understood about 30% of what was being said.
Nothing.
But we all had a great time.
And if you could see it on that video, we'll play it just for a little bit more here. All that sticky stuff on the top there, that is not stucco. That is mold. So again, when we talk about obtaining the unobtainable, having a cellar that's this size with these barrels and that mold construction, which for all intents and purposes helps.
The Champenois, they take care of their mold. There are many old school producers who love their molds. Their molds are part of the ecosystem that makes their wine.
And you have to have tunnels. You have to have tunnels that once you do the tirage from your base wine, you add a little bit of sugar and you add some more yeast, you put a cap on it, and then it sits. It sits for a very long time.
So not only do you need several hectare, which go for 1 to 2 million each, you need to have space to store all these bottles because you need to be aging the wine for 2 years, but many people age for much longer.
And when we look at the tunnels, it's just something that's not reproducible because the infrastructure was already put into place back in the Middle Ages with our monks digging out the chalk. So if anywhere else in the world were to try to even replicate these caves, it just wouldn't be cost efficient. And so these caves allow for perfect temperature and humidity control, so that way they don't have to heat and cool, throughout the year.
Yes, the temperature, humidity, all those kinds of things are part of the factors that go into the quality of the bubbles in your glass.
Mm-hmm. And then having huge facilities, right? Having the ability to do the riddling process, the freezing, the corking, the caging, and the foiling, bringing that into a sellable, market viable product. Again, just real estate and the expertise and the employees to work.
So riddling is the process by which you move the yeast from inside the liquid into the cap. Then they dip the wine into like a ethylene propylene glycol, freeze it off, and then they shoot it out and put a cork in, cage it, foil, and send it out. Or some people do continue to do more aging.
Sure. And then the last one is having an epic chateau and mansion that you can host guests and do wonderful tastings. And so that's the 6 steps to creating a beautiful champagne.
What Steve is not telling you is this is one of the most famous houses in Champagne, and it is in Les Riceys, which is where the same village that this wine is coming from. Our producer tonight is Pierre Moncuit. This is, in the video, is Salon.
Mm-hmm.
are a special person if you get invited to do a tasting at Salon.
All right. And so in the next couple of slides, we're going to talk a little bit about base wine, because there's that base wine that goes into it in order to make when you see non-vintage, like we see on our bottle today, what does that mean? And these base wines over there are stored and then used to help create the sense of non-bottle variability between the different vintages and years.
So we're going to talk a little bit about what some of those words mean in a second. Non-vintage.
So Pierre Peters does wood, and then in the back we can see stainless steel, and then on the left we can see amphora. And so the reason why they have these three different types of cellaring for the base wine is in order to give different feels for the wine. The end product will have a different texture, and they can play with it.
They're basically different levels of oxygenation, more or less.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, these are neutral barrels, but sometimes people do use a little bit of oaking to impart a little bit of the oak characteristic on the wine as well.
Alrighty. So now non-vintage.
What is non-vintage, Stephen? We've thrown around non-vintage a few times.
So non-vintage is a interesting marketing thing to communicate to the consumer that this is going to be the consistent taste of a house or a champagne, and if you go this year and buy one, next year or the year after, it should taste the same. It doesn't change with vintage variability, and so it allows you to find a house that you like.
This is actually one of the more incredible things that big producers in Champagne are able to do. They take hundreds of wines from across the region and blend them so that every year they can deliver a consistent product, and that is the bottle that they make the most of, and that is what they refer to as their non-vintage.
They also take great pride in this. Their non-vintages does not mean that it's an inferior product. They actually want it to be their flagship, the introduction to you as a consumer. If you drink their non-vintage wine and you resonate with it, then you should start to experience and explore their vintage wines and their premier cuvées. There should be some linearity between their non-vintage and those more expensive bottles. So it really is, it's an advertisement to them. And sometimes there's the narrative that says that the non-vintage is the best value wine because they're actually taking less profits on it because, one, they know that they're going to sell the most out of it, but also they want more consumers to give them a shot.
And that's the bottles you're typically going to find if you see champagne at, say, Costco or something like this, at your grocery store. They're going to more often than not be the non-vintage.
There's also just less vintage wine, champagne that's available. And then as time goes on, they get consumed, they get bought and cellared and stored because they do have more ageability.
Another thing, to mention ageability. So non-vintage is typically released drinking well, meaning you buy it, you pop it open, you enjoy it. Sometimes the way a producer works is that they're going to produce cuvées and vintage wines that they drink well now, but they will drink even better in years to come. The non-vintage is meant to be consumed within the next, say, 5 years, typically.
There is something to be said for having, because they lay down their vintage wines and they don't want to just sell it and have you have the burden of holding on to it, but it does allow some opportunity, more historically used, I would think, that if there's a bad vintage and that they're not going to be able to produce as much wine, they can release more of their vintage wine in order to help make up those sales that they would otherwise be missing in order to stay afloat.
And so if you have that big cellar full of bottles, you can sort of play around year to year so you can be able to pay everybody.
Exactly. So a new term that we're starting to see is multi-vintage. We don't need to, not all producers are producing multi-vintages every year. They're a blend of wines, still same as your non-vintage. They can be over the course of multiple years, obviously, as multi-vintage kind of says. When we look at non-vintage and multi-vintage, they sound very similar, and there isn't quite the regulations on multi-vintage yet. I assume that it will come. But typically the producers are putting a lower amount of base wine in it and indicating what vintages are contained within the bottle. Some of the ideals of why this is happening is because we don't know what the future holds, and the marketing aspect of getting consumers accustomed to multi-vintage means that as more bottle variability happens, because of temperature changes from vintage to vintage, they might not be able to create that non-vintage consistency year in and year out. And so then they might need to transition to more of a multi-vintage type of marketing scheme and saying, hey, this is still a blend. We still have a lot of quality that went into this, but it's not going to have that same linearity year in and year out.
Yeah, it's a signal to the consumer.
Yep.
Yeah.
There are also very prestigious brands that are using multi-vintage as a way to say we blend 3 great vintages together in order to produce something that's even better and even more unique. And so right now people are playing with it, and by and large you have to do your homework or hang out with us and we'll kind of tell you what we're excited about.
Yes, you can always message us and we're happy to help you out.
Yeah, especially when it comes to champagne.
So the last one is vintage. This means you're going to see the year on the bottle. This means that all of the grapes in the bottle came from that year, from that harvest. Vintage, as Stephen mentioned, vintage is often lauded as the best, but that isn't necessarily the case, especially it might not be your taste. Each vintage is going to be different. They're going to express what happened that year, and you may like one vintage more than another. You may prefer the non-vintage over the vintages because you prefer that consistent style that they're able to produce, that blend. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of taste. However, when a producer decides to release a vintage, it does mean that they believed the grapes that year were of a quality that it was worth making a bottle entirely out of that vintage. So it's typically it was a good year. Yeah. All right, so
I seem to have drank all of my wine.
Speaking of vintage, non-vintage, all those things, we are drinking the Pierre Moncuit tonight. Something interesting about Pierre Moncuit, there are many interesting things, and we've just launched a little poll. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what you're drinking tonight. So if you have a chance, go ahead and submit a few answers for us. No pressure, but if you'd like to participate, we'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Pierre Moncuit is famous for, actually, they really don't do non-vintage and multi-vintage. Everything they release is single vintage, but they don't make a big deal about it. They don't always put it on the bottle. So this bottle that we're drinking tonight is actually from the 2017 vintage, but it's not advertised as such. Another fun tidbit about Pierre Moncuit is that they have had a female winemaker since 1977, which I think is pretty unique and pretty cool, and I love to hear that. And the daughter is set to inherit and be the next winemaker too. So,
when we start talking about these houses that are these producers that are growing limited supply, they might run out. When we were over there in December, there was a number of places that we reached out to that said, we can't do a tasting because we have no wine left.
They sold out for the season. We were there in December, so that's a bit late in the year. Yeah. So
when we see somebody that says, well, why don't they put their vintage on there and advertise it? And it's because they probably don't have to. And if you go to their website, it is an experience. It is not an easy website to navigate to find information quickly, but it is enjoyable. And so if you have this wine and you're watching this later, go through their website. Every time you click or move your mouse, it takes you to a different screen. It's an experience of a website. And so it took me a while to get to this page, this specific page, in order to find the bottle, in order to share. And the one thing that I was looking for was how many grams per liter are in this wine.
Earlier today you took a little quiz on matching the dosage with the name, and what did you find, Stephen?
So that this has 7 grams per liter in this. And so what does that mean, right? We're starting to see a lot of wines hitting the shelf that say 0 dosage, no dosage, and
Brut
nature, and that has 0 grams per liter. Personally, for me, when I taste them, they have laser sharp acidity. And without having the absolute right cheese pairing, something that's like a triple brie that just cuts, that acid is used to cut through, it's not as enjoyable of an experience for me.
Some wine writers I admire have actually mentioned that they find a couple of grams per liter can balance it to the point that it's complete, and without it, it doesn't work. However, we've had some Brut Nature wines that were amazing on their own. So I think what we're finding is that people who are producing them just for the marketing the results can be mixed, but when it's a good producer adding the right dosage to balance the wine, that's when you get perfection.
That's right. And 7 grams per liter is not detectable sweetness. 7 grams per liter is just for most people.
There might be a few super tasters in the audience.
It's just going to help balance that the acidity, and again, as we were talking, create that mouthfeel, right? That luscious fruits can kind of be held in the palate, and it has like a longing that keeps driving you back. It's not an assault.
Yes, we have had many wines from, I believe it's Nicole Moncuit, and we've really enjoyed all of them. But the longer aged ones with a little bit of dosage seem to be our favorites, and so this is a delightful bottle.
We were able to procure this wine from Wine Access, and again, compliments to them.
Shout out to Wine Access.
Yeah. Their information's absolutely great. 42 degrees as the serving temperature is right on the number. We like to serve it at that point too and allow the wine to sit and even warm up from there. You don't want to necessarily start super cold because then it's going to take too long to open up.
High quality champagnes are not best served or best consumed fully at that ice cold refrigerator temperature. You want to let it warm up a little bit, which is easy to do by letting it sit in the glass for a few moments. But.
And then with temperature, the phenolics are just going to be able to escape out.
Yeah.
As we see here, also what Beth was saying earlier, that your non-vintages don't need to be laid down for as long. Although this was a specific, we know that it comes from the 2017 vintage. If you're going to lay down a bottle, you would get the better bottles that have higher quality fruit and higher quality juice that are in them, because it takes up cellar space. There's a real cost to keep a bottle of wine in inventory, and so when you factor that out over the course of 5 to 10 years, it makes sense to just start with higher quality wine. I think one of the reasons why you like champagne so much is because it is 12.5 ABV.
Oh yes, another plus in my mind. So we did Napa, California last time we spoke, and that was probably closer to 15 and a half. I think champagne's delightful at 12 and a half. It allows me to enjoy a nice glass. And you might notice a few details on the bottle. Like we do see that does say Brut. We also can find, if you're looking at the back, when it was disgorged. That's becoming more of a trend, which is really nice. It'll tell you basically when they did that freezing, the riddling, freezing, and adding the cork, and that can give you an idea of how long ago it moved out of their inventory. It can also give you a hint of how long it was aging on the lees, things like that. So it's nice that they include that. Mm-hmm. You can see it says Blanc de Blanc. Blanc de Blanc means white of whites. That means it's 100% Chardonnay, or Chardonnay, as we like to say. And it's been in the family since 1889. And as I said, Nicole Moncuit's been producing since 1977. So.
And then the last shout out is Wine Folly. Thank you again so much. Your graphics are awesome. And she made an aroma wheel for champagne specifically. It's a pretty good encompassing champagne wheel. The one caveat is that when we drink Blanc de Blanc from the Côte de Blanc of Champagne, some of the times we get a very confectionery tasting note.
So think of like powdered sugar on top of a cookie, or a Parisian bakery. There's that confectionery smell. That's one of the things I really like about, especially Le Ménis Auger, and we get that in a lot of our favorite producers, including some others that we found through Wine Access.
Yeah, that's very true. But yes, so this is it's a great kind of guide to go back to. I know a lot of people have already submitted their tasting notes.
Yes, we'd love to see what
amendments can be made in the open chat. So at this point in time,
I do have one more thing I'd like to add before we close off. Okay, so let's say your mind is blown. You want to learn more about champagne. We love champagne. We study it all the time. I have a few things I can recommend if you'd like to continue your learning. I'm putting in the chat a champagne MOOC. So this is a massive online course that you can take. It's coming from it comes in a couple of languages. You can actually get a certificate if you pay for it, but you don't need to pay for anything. And it's a really fun way to see some videos and learn some things about champagne. It's definitely leaning a little bit more towards the big houses. If you want to learn more about grower champagne, I can't recommend enough this book, which I'll also put the title and the author in the chat. It's Bursting Bubbles, and it's a fun kind of like travel blog style book written by an Australian importer about grower champagne, and he challenges a lot of myths about champagne in here. Fun read. And then if you're looking for
one caveat though, with this book, if you do read this book,
it will ruin you.
It will ruin you. You will have so many Quest bottles that you cannot afford if you could find them. That's the crazy thing about it. You can't even find them in order to spend an obscene amount of money to try them. But he just writes in such an inspiring way that is admirable.
Yeah, and then another one that's a lot of fun, has a lot of like good pictures and fun stories. This is Bursting Bubbles, and this is written by a woman who owns a couple of really cool champagne bars in New York City. So if you're looking for some kind of more of a coffee table book style, this one's really fun. It does have some information in here too, a lot of focus on producers, and then she does talk about sparkling wines from the rest of the world. So
yeah, and again, these are not paid ads. We just love champagne so much, and hope that our resources can be your resources, and then we can have great, detailed and deep conversations.
Yeah. Wine Folly is also a great resource.
I forgot I put this video in here. One thing about the French, they love chickens. And so when we were over there, just in front of the chateau, overlooking the beautiful Menisse, there was just chickens hanging out. Fancy chickens. They looked very well taken care of.
Yeah, well, this is just outside of a champagne house.
Yeah.
those are cages they use for riddling.
And so with that, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. Hope that you have a wonderful time, and take care.
Yeah, so we're going to close the recording now, and we're going to transition to the Brady Bunch view so we can do a little chat about everyone's experience. Oh, exit poll.
Yep.